What if I told you that much of the pain you carry does not come from what was done to you, but from what you decided to keep tolerating, not because you lack dignity, but because at some point you convinced yourself it was normal, that to love meant to endure, that toxicity was passion, and that hurtful behavior was just part of the other person's character. This video will break that because what Carl Jung wrote was not just theory, it was a warning. And today, we will reveal it to you. We are not here to teach you to judge. We are here to help you awaken. Because when you spend years justifying what tears you apart, your nervous system gets used to the abuse. Your mind normalizes it. Your soul silently begins to shut down until one day you no longer know what it feels like to live without fear. Carl Jung did not write books to decorate shelves. He wrote to free the soul from the invisible chains that bind it to destructive relationships. And one of his most powerful teachings was this: that which is not made conscious becomes destiny. If you don't become aware of what you are tolerating, you condemn yourself to repeat it. This video is a map to recognize the 10 behaviors that Jung, from his deep understanding of the human soul, would never have advised you to endure. And when you finish watching it, you will know not only how to identify these patterns, but how to stop justifying the unjustifiable, how to choose yourself, how to reclaim your power. This will not be comfortable. We did not come to give you soft words. We came to shake you because maybe you need it. Because it's likely you are watching this in silence, having swallowed your intuition, your anger, your sadness too many times. But here, you will release all that. Have you ever asked yourself how many times you said, "It's nothing," when everything inside you was screaming that something was indeed happening? How many times did you give second chances to people who didn't even value the first? How many times did you have to diminish yourself so someone wouldn't feel threatened by your shine? This content does not seek for you to hate anyone. It seeks for you to stop betraying yourself. Jung spoke to us about the shadow as that place where everything we do not allow ourselves to feel hides. And when you tolerate the intolerable, part of you goes straight into that shadow. It hides, it dims, but it does not disappear. It hurts you from within. There are boundaries you don't set for fear of losing the other, but the cost of that is losing yourself. And when that price is paid every day, the soul runs out of space, out of voice, until you disconnect from who you are. That's why today we bring you this message. There are things you should have never tolerated. It's not about being extreme. It's about being clear, because no one should learn to live in emotional chaos as if it were normal. There are attitudes that are not mistakes. They are repeated choices. There are ways of treating you that are not flaws. They are signals. And if you don't see them in time, you will pay with your peace. Carl Jung made it clear that what you don't integrate repeats. And if you don't become conscious of what you have allowed in the name of love, your unconscious will keep attracting more of the same, not because you hate yourself, but because you haven't yet learned to stop the cycle. Maybe right now you are in a relationship. Maybe you've already left. Maybe you are on an emotional pause. Whatever your situation, this video will give you clarity you cannot ignore, because each of these unacceptable behaviors has surrounded you more than once, and it's time to see them by name and surname. Here we will not romanticize toxicity. Here we will expose it, because the first step to healing is not forgiving, it is identifying. And when you do, something inside you begins to awaken with a strength that no one taught you to use, your own dignity. Jung said people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their soul. But you are here, and that means you have already decided to look inside. That self-deception no longer serves you, that you can no longer tolerate what steals your essence. There are words that hurt more than screams, silences that fill more than insults, attitudes that kill you alive. And if you don't recognize that, you could spend years trapped in dynamics that only replicate your original wound, the feeling of not being enough. In this video, you will see how these 10 behaviors disconnect you from yourself, how normalizing them harms you, and how stopping allowing them is not revenge, it's healing. Because when you decide not to tolerate the intolerable, You give yourself permission to start another story. This channel does not exist to entertain you. It exists to touch your soul, to help you see what maybe no one dared to show you honestly, to name what you feel but don't know how to explain, so you don't keep confusing loyalty with emotional sacrifice. It's likely you feel anger while watching this, or sadness or confusion. That's okay. It means something inside you is being stirred. Don't stop it. Let it out. Because every emotion that surfaces is a sign that you are ready to understand what you couldn't process before. And when you've heard it all, when you reach the end, you will have a clear promise in your hands. You will never again justify what harms your soul in the name of love. You will never again put yourself last to support someone who doesn't know how to care for you. This content is your mirror and also your bridge. It is the reflection of what you have lived and the path toward what you are about to start building. Because some relationships come to teach you what you deserve, but others come only to show you what you no longer have to accept. You are not broken for having tolerated. You are brave for being willing to stop doing so. You are conscious, you are awake, and that is more than enough to start. So stay, because what you are about to learn today can change your life. We are going to talk about the 10 behaviors that, according to Jung's teachings, you should never allow again because your soul is worth too much to remain in places where it cannot breathe. This is more than a video. It is an act of self-love. It is a line drawn in the sand, and also the first step to healing from the root. 1. Covert emotional manipulation. When someone makes you feel guilty for setting boundaries, for having needs, or for not acting as that person expects, you are facing manipulation that attacks your very essence. Jung maintained that the soul becomes sick when its truth is denied, and that denial starts when you adapt to avoid the emotional punishment of the other. The first step to healing is noticing when you stop being yourself to avoid losing someone. Exercise. Write a list of the times you acted from guilt and not from authentic desire. What pattern repeats? Who usually triggers it? 2. Contempt disguised as sincerity. There are those who use phrases like, "I'm just being straightforward," to justify harsh words. But sincerity without compassion is just cruelty in disguise. Jung said personality is nourished with recognition, not constant criticism. Don't tolerate being spoken to as if you are worth less. True love does not destroy self-esteem. Exercise. What phrases have marked your wound and you still repeat in your mind? Were they really constructive or just attempts to control your way of being? 3. Control disguised as protection. When someone wants to decide for you, limit your friendships or personal space, under the excuse that it's for your own good, they are actually projecting their fear and need to dominate. Jung spoke of power as a poorly integrated shadow, a desire to control to avoid facing internal chaos. No one who loves you takes away your freedom. Exercise. In what ways have you felt your freedom restricted? Did you confuse it with love? Why? 4. Gaslighting, distorting your emotional reality. This is one of the most dangerous. It's when someone denies your perception, makes you believe you are exaggerating, that you are crazy, that everything is in your head. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But if you constantly doubt yourself because of what others say, something is breaking inside." Exercise. Write down moments when you doubted your own feelings or perceptions because someone else told you they were wrong or exaggerated. Reflect on how often this happened and how it made you feel about yourself. Identify if this caused you to lose trust in your own judgment. Think of a situation where you felt a clear emotion and then someone made you doubt it. How did you talk to yourself afterward? Did you believe yourself? 5. Contempt toward your inner world. There are people who invalidate your dreams, your passions, your interests because they don't understand or share them. But no one has the right to extinguish your inner fire. Jung said that what is denied is subjected. What you accept transforms. Don't shrink yourself to fit into an emotional reality that does not honor your essence. Exercise. What parts of yourself have you silenced so as not to upset someone else? What voice inside you is asking to be heard again? 6. Constant lack of empathy. We can all fail to be empathetic sometimes. But if you are beside someone who never validates your pain, who minimizes your emotions, and always turns everything back to themselves, you are dealing with an emotionally inaccessible person, and over time, that erodes your spirit. Jung taught that without empathy, there is no deep connection, only an exchange of needs. Exercise. Recall the last time you cried or suffered with someone. Did that person support you or judge you? What did you really need? 7. Repeated and justified betrayal. An apology without change is just a strategy to keep you, not a sign of growth. Jung spoke of compulsive repetition as a sign of unhealed trauma. If someone hurts you again and again with the same actions and convinces you it was a mistake, maybe you're not seeing the pattern. You are trapped in it. Exercise. Make a timeline of the times you said, "This is the last time," and then went back. What made you stay? What are you really afraid of? 8. Selfishness disguised as self-sufficiency. There are people who don't know how to give because their world revolves only around what they feel, think, or want. You are always the one holding the relationship, remembering, caring, and the other only shows up when they need something. That's not a bond. That's emotional exploitation. Exercise. In which relationships do you give more than 70%? How does that make you feel? Do you talk about it or just endure it? 9. Constant sarcasm as a form of relationship. When sarcasm becomes the only way of communicating, it leaves invisible wounds because it is passive aggression disguised as humor. Jung said the unconscious finds ways to say what you don't dare to say out loud, and often that sarcasm is repressed contempt. Exercise. What sarcastic phrases have left a mark on you? What direct emotion do you think they really belong to? 10. Emotional indifference as punishment. There is no quieter way to punish someone than by ignoring them, giving them the silent treatment, or pretending they don't exist. This is called emotional withdrawal, and it is deeply harmful. Jung affirmed that humans need connection in order not to fragment. Being systematically ignored is not a neutral act. It is a form of emotional violence. Exercise. Think of a time when you were intentionally ignored. How did that affect your entire self-image? What did you do to be seen again? Each of these behaviors has long-term psychological consequences. They are not simple reactions. They are seeds of inner disconnection. And the worst part is that the longer you tolerate them, the more normal they become until your soul incorporates them as what you deserve. But you do not deserve to be confused, silenced, minimized, or used. You deserve a space where you can breathe without fear, feel without justification, speak without your words being weapons against you. You deserve real love, and real love begins with you. Carl Jung did not teach us to hate others. He taught us to stop hating ourselves for allowing what hurts us. And that is the difference between repeating and freeing yourself. Take a pause, reread each of these points, and ask yourself, which have I normalized? Which is hardest for me to recognize? Which has repeated in my story for years? Only when you recognize it can you decide differently. Only when you name it can you heal. And today, you are not the same person who pressed play on this video. Now you have awareness. Now you can choose yourself. And if this video has touched your soul, we want to propose something. Go to the comments and write this phrase. I no longer negotiate my peace to stay in places that break me. Leave it as a testimony, as a promise, as a declaration of self-love that begins today. When Jung spoke of the shadow, he wasn't referring only to the negative. He spoke of everything we repress. Our pain, yes, but also our voice, our boundaries, our dignity. Tolerating unacceptable behaviors is often a way to reinforce that shadow, to keep hiding everything we still don't dare to defend in ourselves. The fact that we repeat toxic relationships is not a sign of emotional weakness, but rather a symptom of an unconscious wound. Freud explained that the compulsion to repeat arises when trauma has not been processed. That is why we join the same type of people, unconsciously expecting a different outcome. We don't do it out of masochism. We do it because of an unresolved hope. When you normalize manipulation, indifference, or lack of empathy, what you do is make a pact with your wound. And that pact is not verbal, it is emotional. It is the moment when you decide that feeling a little affection is enough, even if it comes wrapped in lovelessness. But I remind you, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will keep directing your life, and you will call it destiny. Deep psychology does not seek for you to hate those who hurt you. It seeks for you to recognize how that experience shaped you, so you don't keep giving your story to the same type of person. Because every time you tolerate a behavior that breaks you, what you are doing is training your unconscious to believe that this is love. There is something more devastating than being hurt, justifying having been hurt. That is the slow poison of unhealthy relationships. You learn to tell yourself that everyone fails, that no one is perfect, that it wasn't that bad. But the severity is not always in the event itself. It's in how you swallow it, in how your soul runs out of space to breathe. When a person stays in bonds where they are humiliated, it's not because they have no options. It's because their emotional system is conditioned to believe that anything is better than abandonment. It is here where Jung's work intersects with Adler's. The deeply rooted feeling of inferiority generates unbalanced relationships where one becomes the bearer of all the emotional weight. Deciding that there are things you will no longer tolerate is a spiritual, psychological, and emotional act. It is the exact moment when you stop waiting for the world to treat you well and start treating yourself as you have always deserved. And that internal shift, although invisible, is so powerful that it changes everything. Freud spoke of the pleasure principle as an unconscious force that seeks to avoid pain. But when you learn to associate love with suffering, pleasure becomes confusion. You seek emotional adrenaline, intensity, drama, believing that is connection. But it is only the echo of a wounded pattern. Many of these unacceptable behaviors don't hurt because they are explicit. They hurt because they are subtle, because they come from those you love the most. And that makes them dangerous because you cannot set boundaries with someone you still idealize. That is why Jung spoke of individuation as the breaking of the illusion of the other as your savior. Do you know when real transformation begins? The day you see yourself defending what you once kept silent, not with hatred, but with firmness, not with violence, but with truth. That is the point where dignity stops being theory and becomes action. A person who loves you does not play with your wounds. They respect them, honor them, and care for them. And if there is someone in your life who uses your vulnerabilities to invalidate you, dominate you, or make you feel less, that is not love. It is a toxic repetition that you need to cut, not justify. John said that the goal of life is not perfection, but wholeness. And wholeness includes the ability to say, "This I no longer accept." Because silence in the face of abuse is not nobility, it is disconnection, and you deserve to come back to yourself. The most dangerous relationships are not the ones that shout at you, but those that extinguish you without you noticing. They drain you, minimize you, make you doubt what you know, and the most tragic thing is that they do it in the name of love. But love is never constant confusion. Adler said that a meaningful life is one in which you can develop freely without being subjected to or subjecting others. And if your relationship doesn't allow you to grow, if it demands that you shrink, you are not in love. You are in emotional prison. There are phrases that are said once and stay with you forever, like, "Are you exaggerating?" or "It wasn't that bad," or "You're too sensitive." Each of those phrases, when repeated, becomes a wall that separates you from your emotional truth. What is unacceptable is not always obvious. Sometimes it hides in the everyday, in the "I don't care what happens to you," in the "do whatever you want," said with contempt, or in the "here you go again with your dramas." You don't need shouting to be mistreated. A constant denial of your being is enough. John insisted that every relationship is a mirror, and when someone makes you feel small, voiceless, or confused, maybe they are not activating something new. Maybe they are just touching an old wound you didn't know how to face. Until now. Viktor Frankl spoke of suffering as an inevitable part of existence, but distinguished between suffering that transforms you and suffering that destroys you. And you, watching this video, have the right to decide which path to follow. Maybe a part of you still wonders, but if I don't tolerate it, will I be alone? That is the great trap of wounded relationships. They make you believe that if you set a limit, you lose love. But what you are losing is not love. It is dependency. The soul, as Jung said, cannot pretend coherence. You may appear fine, smile on social media, say everything is under control, but if inside there is anguish, insomnia, anxiety, or constant confusion, something isn't working. You are not here by chance. You are here because a part of you is waking up, and that part no longer wants a half-life, no longer wants love in installments, no longer wants relationships where it has to justify being who it is. True emotional health begins the day you decide not to negotiate your peace again. That day is not celebrated with fireworks, but it feels like the start of a different life, a life in which you can finally breathe. When he said the greatest privilege in life is to be who you really are, he was also saying, stop disguising yourself to be accepted, because what starts with a disguise ends in loss of identity. If you had to become someone else to be loved, then that was not love. It was an emotional transaction. And you didn't come to this world to negotiate your essence. You came to share your truth. One of the greatest contributions of Coram was teaching us to look at life not from the surface, but from the deep roots of the unconscious. That's why, when someone makes you feel your pain is exaggerated or your boundaries are a problem, what they're really doing is projecting their own shadow onto you. Jung affirmed that people project what they don't dare face in themselves. So every time you tolerate emotional contempt, you are allowing another to unload their darkness onto you. There is a deeply unacceptable behavior that is rarely mentioned when someone mocks your healing process. That subtle but hurtful attitude reflects a total disconnection from the soul's evolution. John taught that individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, makes uncomfortable those who are still trapped in their mass. If someone discredits your emotional progress, it's not because you have to go backward. It's because your progress reflects their stagnation. Allowing yourself to be constantly invalidated is a way of losing yourself. Jung was clear. Depression is like a woman dressed in black. If she appears, don't run away. Invite her to sit, to listen to what she has to say. If your emotions are treated as a nuisance, a burden, too much, then you are not in a healthy emotional space. Because your sadness, fear, or anger are not mistakes. They are messengers. One of the most unacceptable behaviors from the Jungian perspective is when someone forces you to betray your intuition. Jung said intuition is a psychic function that transmits perceptions through the unconscious. If a relationship constantly makes you doubt what you know is wrong, you are losing your internal compass. And without that compass, you lose yourself. Tolerating the constant minimization of your emotional efforts is another form of silent aggression. Jung emphasized that the soul needs recognition to flourish. When your attempts to improve, heal, or grow are ignored or taken as something lesser, the message you receive is clear. No matter what you do, it will never be enough. And that message is one of the most destructive a psyche can receive. When someone demands that you forgive without having transformed themselves, they are asking for impunity, not redemption. John said that true change comes from facing inner conflict. And if a person repeats the same harm over and over without owning their shadow, they are not evolving, they are manipulating. Forgiving does not mean exposing yourself again to the same wound, it means letting go consciously. One of the most common mistakes is thinking empathy is earned through sacrifice. Jung would say the opposite. Sacrifice without recognition of your truth leads to resentment. And resentment is one of the signs that you have tolerated the intolerable. If in a relationship you are always the one who gives in, who stays silent, who adapts, then you are not in a reciprocal bond. You are in an emotional symmetry that exhausts you. Jung also taught that there is no individuation without separation. Sometimes the most loving act toward yourself is to walk away from the one who harms you, even if that person says they love you, because true love does not need you to destroy yourself to keep it alive. If a relationship forces you to sacrifice your mental health to function, that relationship has already stopped being love. When you silence what hurts you to avoid upsetting others, you are doing the opposite of what Jung proposed, making the unconscious conscious. What is not expressed accumulates, turning into somatization, anxiety, and insomnia. If you are with someone to whom you cannot say what you feel without fearing their reaction, you are in an emotionally unsafe environment. To close this section, I want you to do this. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and repeat mentally, "My soul deserves to be heard, not ignored." And if this video is helping you awaken, leave that phrase in the comments. Write, "My soul deserves to be heard, not ignored." Do it as an act of presence, as an affirmation, as a symbol that today begins a new way of relating to yourself and the world. You cannot build a full life if your emotional foundations are sustained by the silent renunciation of your dignity. Carl Jung said that one of the most common illnesses of the modern soul is the forgetting of oneself. You don't realize how much you have lost until you see yourself justifying damage, tolerating the intolerable, and calling love what is nothing but disguised dependency. From Alfred Adler's perspective, many behaviors we tolerate have nothing to do with love or respect, but are unconscious compensations for feelings of inferiority. That is, the less valuable you feel internally, the more willing you are to accept emotional crumbs externally. But you were not born to eat emotional crumbs. You were born to sit at the table of your truth. There are relationships that do not teach you to love, but to endure. And the more you learn to endure, the further you drift from yourself. That disconnection creates such a deep emptiness that even when someone new comes along offering real love, you no longer know how to receive it, because your soul has become used to conflict, not care. Erich Fromm spoke of the art of loving as a capacity that requires emotional maturity, responsibility, respect, and knowledge. If you're in a relationship where you constantly have to explain what should be basic, like not yelling, not lying, not ignoring you, then you're not with an emotional partner. You're with an immature projection that still doesn't know how to relate from a place of consciousness. One of the greatest psychological challenges is breaking free from the emotional savior pattern, that trap where you believe your love will transform the other person. But as Jung said, no one changes until they are confronted with their own shadow. If you're doing the internal work that the other person should be doing, you're not helping. You're enabling their immaturity. When you tolerate behaviors that hurt you, your unconscious interprets it as agreement. Because the body speaks too, the soul feels too. And if you stay, even while crying, suffering, or screaming inside, the message is, this is okay. But it's not, and your soul knows it. Viktor Frankl said that inner freedom is the last of human rights, even in the midst of suffering. Tolerating humiliation, contempt, emotional abandonment, or psychological manipulation is not strength, it's surrender. And there is no full life in the surrender of your inner truth. The wound of feeling not enough is fed every time you choose someone who confirms it. It's a vicious cycle. The less you love yourself, the more you expose yourself to those who reinforce your lack. And the more they reinforce your lack, the harder it is to break free. That's why the first act of healing is to stop the cycle, and for that, you need to wake up. Carl Rogers spoke about the importance of unconditional positive self-regard. That means loving yourself not only when you're strong, beautiful, productive, or intelligent, but also when you're broken, sad, vulnerable, or confused. If someone only loves you when you're okay, they don't really love you. They love your facade, and you are not a facade. There are relationships that infantilize us, that make us feel we have to behave, to avoid being punished with silence, indifference, or abandonment. That's not adult love. That's emotional regression. And I had forgotten that inner growth means leaving behind the wounded child who seeks constant approval and embracing the adult who sets boundaries without guilt. Emotional dependency is born from the fear of facing your emptiness. But that emptiness isn't filled by another person. It's filled by you, by your inner gaze, your daily care, your commitment to never abandon yourself for anyone again. As Donald Winnicott said, "The good enough mother is not perfect. She's simply the one who doesn't leave." Be that support for yourself. Enduring in silence is not love. It's unresolved trauma. And that trauma is not healed with time. It's healed through conscious action, reflection, therapy, and decisions that, though painful, build freedom. Because as Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and you are not your wound. Maybe you've been tolerating what you don't deserve for years, because no one taught you how to discern, because you grew up in an environment where mistreatment was normal, where yelling was common, where contempt was routine. But just because you grew up that way doesn't mean you must live that way. Consciousness changes destiny, and you are now aware. Your worth is not negotiable. It is not to be begged for. It is not to be pleaded for. It is not to be bought. It is to be recognized, upheld, and honored. Every time you say, "I won't allow this anymore," you're honoring your soul. And when the soul is honored, it starts to open paths that once seemed impossible. Psychology has shown us that when someone surrounds themselves with harmful relationships again and again, it's not bad luck, it's unconscious programming. As Jung said, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become from what happened to you. And today, you can choose differently. You are not here to endure. You are here to transform. And that transformation doesn't begin with the other person. It begins when you stop explaining the inexplicable, justifying the unjustifiable, and loving those who don't even know how to love themselves. There is a force within you that's been silenced for years. It's your intuition, and intuition doesn't scream, it whispers. But that whisper holds more truth than 1,000 external pieces of advice. Jung spoke of intuition as a bridge to the unconscious. Don't ignore it, listen. It knows what your mind still fears to accept. It's common for trauma to make us hyper-loyal to those who harm us, because the brain, for the sake of survival, prefers what's familiar, even if it hurts. But you didn't come here to repeat stories. You came to write your own. And in your story, there's no longer room for those who don't know how to care for you. Every time you forgive someone who hasn't changed, your unconscious learns that no matter how much you're hurt, you will always return. That is not nobility. That is self-abandonment. And when the soul is abandoned over and over, it starts to dim, until one day you no longer recognize your own reflection. The most sacred work you can do is not to become someone stronger. It is to become someone more honest, more aligned, more you. And from there, the unacceptable no longer enters, because your energy no longer vibrates in lack. It vibrates in clarity. You want to be respected? Then respect yourself first. You want to be cared for? Care for yourself. You want to be chosen unconditionally? Choose yourself unconditionally. Because no one can give you what you haven't yet decided to sustain within. The deepest connections are not those that give you everything, but those that take nothing essential from you. If someone demands you give up parts of yourself just to stay, then they don't want a relationship, they want a mold. And you are not moldable, you are authentic. Some wounds reopen over and over simply because you never learned to say, "Not here." That simple phrase can change an entire life. Because when you say it from the heart, when you say it from the soul, the universe aligns with your clarity. There are different relationships still waiting for you. There are still people to meet who won't wound you, who won't dim your light, who won't make you hide. But first, you need to make sure you're not the one dimming your own light. You are not broken. You are awakening. You're coming out of years of emotional programming that taught you love is suffering, that to care is to surrender until you disappear, that company is worth more than peace. But Jung made it clear. He who looks outside dreams, but he who looks inside awakens. And you are no longer here to keep dreaming stories where you always lose. You've been loyal to those who didn't protect you. You've given love without holding back, hoping the other would understand your soul. But here is the truth. No one will understand your soul unless you value it first. Emotional dignity is not arrogance. It is the deep root from which real love is built. Without it, everything that blooms is fragile. From this day on, you can stop apologizing for feeling, for setting boundaries, for walking away from what no longer represents you. You don't need an elaborate explanation to protect your peace. You have the right to close the door with the same energy you once left it open, out of fear of being alone. Life will keep testing you, but now you have something you didn't have before: clarity. And that clarity isn't bought. It's earned through pain, difficult decisions, and emotional courage. Now that you have it, now that you've awakened, don't fall asleep again in front of what you already know harms you. There will be people who won't understand your transformation, who will call you exaggerated, selfish, or cold, but you owe them no explanation, because they haven't felt your silent nights, your hidden tears, your attempts to fit into something too small for you. Let them think what they want. You keep walking. The soul doesn't scream, but when it's been ignored many times, it begins to break you from within. And that pain is its last way of telling you, listen to me. Don't wait until the limit to make the change. Do it today. Do it because you've already understood that love isn't begged for, it's honored. Remember this: there is no healing without decision. There is no freedom without boundaries. There is no self-love without giving up self-deception. And when you manage to hold these three truths in your heart, you stop seeking mediocre loves and start building relationships that reflect your integrity. So if this video made you think, if at any moment you felt a lump in your throat, if a part of you said, "I've lived this," go to the comments and write this phrase: "My soul is sacred and will no longer be the refuge of what destroys me." Do it as an affirmation, as a testimony, as an open door to a new destiny, because now comes the most awaited part, the story. That moment when everything you've felt, everything you've understood, transforms into a living mirror where you can see yourself reflected, hurt, hopeful, and finally healed. Stay until the end, because this story will not only move you, it will show you that what you're living has meaning, that this whole emotional path you've walked has been leading you exactly to this point, to recognize yourself, to free yourself, to start again. The first time he saw her, he thought he had found something sacred. She was magnetic, unpredictable, intelligent. He looked at her as if he could read her soul, but he was only reading her emptiness. He didn't know it, but what he had found wasn't love. It was a perfect reflection of his oldest wound, the need to feel seen. His name was Damien, 33 years old, son of a father who only spoke with silences and a mother who never knew how to set boundaries. He grew up thinking that to be loved, he had to be useful, perfect, impeccable. When she appeared, he became her emotional project, to make her happy so she wouldn't leave him. At first, everything seemed like a deep connection. She said she had never met anyone as sensitive as him. She praised him, sought him, needed him. But over time, something began to change. The silences became punishments. The criticisms were disguised as jokes. Apologies always came without change. Damien told himself it was normal, that all relationships have ups and downs, that she had a strong character. But he loved her. He justified everything. The indifference, the sarcasm, the contempt, even the time she humiliated him in front of his friends and then told him he was too dramatic. Every time he tried to talk about his feelings, she laughed or changed the subject. She told him he was too sensitive, too intense, that he exaggerated everything. Damien began to doubt his own perception. Sometimes he locked himself in the bathroom just to ask if he was losing his mind. He didn't know it then, but he was experiencing a clear case of gaslighting. And instead of walking away, he tried harder because in his mind, the problem was himself. If he could be more patient, more understanding, stronger, then she would be the woman she was at the beginning again. One night, after an argument where she shouted that he was useless and left him talking alone, Damien went out for a walk with no direction. He felt a weight on his chest, a pressure he couldn't understand. He sat on a park bench and for the first time thought, what if this isn't love? What if this isn't right? That's when he remembered a phrase he had read in a book by Karen. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Something inside him broke because he realized that this was exactly what he had done his whole life. The next day he made an appointment with a therapist. He didn't know what to say, he just cried. He said he felt empty, confused, exhausted, and didn't understand why he loved someone who made him feel so small. The therapist looked at him kindly and said, "You're not in love. You're trapped in an unresolved emotional repetition." They began a healing process. In every session, Danny faced parts of himself he had buried: his wounded child, his urge to scream, his contained anger, his need to be approved. It was painful, but for the first time in years, he felt alive. He began to read Jung with devotion, underlining phrases as if they were mantras. There is no awakening of consciousness without pain. Everything that irritates us about others leads us to the knowledge of ourselves. Your vision will clear only when you look into your own heart. In therapy, he discovered he had normalized unacceptable behaviors because that was how he had learned to survive. His first model of love had been emotional abandonment. That's why he felt at home when he was ignored. The familiar is not always healthy. One afternoon, after another argument with her, he no longer felt guilt or anxiety. He felt clarity, and that clarity was his first act of dignity. He didn't yell or beg. He simply said, "No more." She looked at him as if he were crazy. She told him he would regret it, that no one would love him like she did. But he knew something he didn't know before. Love that doesn't respect is not love. It's possession, it's shadow, it's control. And he was no longer willing to be the character in a story that was suffocating him. The first days were hard: loneliness, emptiness, relapses. But every time he thought about going back, he read his notes, returned to therapy sessions, wrote to his inner child, "I won't leave you alone anymore." It was his sacred promise, his new life contract. Slowly, he began to rediscover himself. He started walking without fear, eating without anxiety, reading without being interrupted by criticism, laughing without asking for permission, writing, existing without guilt, without owing explanations to anyone. He understood that he was not weak for having tolerated so much. He was strong for deciding to leave, because, as Jung said, the encounter with oneself is the most terrifying act that exists. And he had found himself, yes, wounded, but also more whole than ever. He began to surround himself with new people, friends who validated him, who listened to him, who cared for him. He discovered that love didn't have to hurt to be real, that one honest conversation could heal more than 1,000 promises. The tenderness wasn't weakness, it was courage. The day she messaged him asking to come back, he no longer felt anxiety. He felt compassion, not hatred, not resentment, just compassion. Because he understood she had not yet begun her journey. But he was already far away, walking a new emotional map. He calmly blocked her and kept moving forward. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, because he now knew who he was. And from that place, self-respect became his compass. The real miracle wasn't leaving her. It was finding himself. After years of emotional betrayal, of internal abandonment, of unheard silences, he finally had himself. And that was all he needed. When he shared his story in a support group, others began to cry because they saw themselves in it. They understood they weren't alone, that healing is possible, that you can learn to love again, this time for yourself. Damien never sought love the same way again. He no longer needed it to validate himself. He sought it to share. He was no longer an emotional beggar. He was a whole being. And from that place, everything changed. Today, he lives with awareness, with calm, with gratitude. Not because he has no wounds, but because he integrated them. He transformed them. He turned them into deep roots from which he now blooms fearlessly. Because the most profound truth he discovered was this: there are behaviors you should never have tolerated, but now you know you never have to again, because you've awakened. And from that awakening, no one can ever again make you forget your worth. Damien's story is a clear representation of the process Carl Jung called individuation, the journey back to oneself through confrontation with the unconscious. Damien didn't just leave a toxic relationship. He left behind a version of himself that was trapped in emotional dependency. From the beginning, we see a pattern that Jung pointed to as alarming: projection. Damien didn't love his partner for who she truly was. He loved what she represented in his unconscious, an idealized figure meant to fill the emotional voids he had carried since childhood. This isn't authentic love, it's emotional survival. When Jung said, "What is not made conscious becomes destiny," he was speaking of cases like this. Damien was unknowingly repeating the pattern of his childhood, giving everything to be seen, seeking love from someone emotionally absent, just as he once did with his father. Damien's tolerance of humiliation, criticism, and gaslighting wasn't weakness. It was the result of emotional programming that taught him to endure in order not to be rejected. Freud called this the repetition compulsion, a phenomenon where we recreate our original traumas in the unconscious hope of a different outcome. At no point in the story do we see Damien explicitly asking for love. He asks for it through actions, by pleasing, by staying silent, by justifying. This type of dynamic is what Erich Fromm called immature love, where the desire to possess the other overrides freedom and authenticity. When Damien starts to doubt his own perception, we are witnessing the classic effect of gaslighting. This form of psychological abuse aims to make the victim lose confidence in their internal judgment. Jung warned, "A person who does not trust their intuition is at the mercy of external control." Damien's decision to seek therapy is the turning point. It's the moment he stops blaming himself and begins observing himself. That step, from guilt to awareness, is essential in any therapeutic process. It is the birth of the authentic self. In his process, Damien confronts his shadow, a fundamental concept in Jungian psychology. The shadow isn't only what's ugly, it's everything we've repressed: anger, sadness, the desire to set boundaries. By integrating his shadow, Damien stops being a passive victim and becomes the active subject of his life. As he reads Jung, Damien begins to expand his inner vision. His underlined quotes aren't random, they are anchors. They are ways to bring into the present the new truth his soul is beginning to understand. That not everything that hurts is love. That not everything that stays is good. That not everything familiar deserves to be repeated. The process of individuation Damien experiences is painful, because it means giving up his old role, the perfect man who endures everything, who justifies everything. Jung said the ego must surrender for the soul to emerge. And that's exactly what our protagonist does. His therapist plays a key role, not as a savior, but as a mirror. She offers support, yes, but also confrontation. Therapy doesn't tell him what to do. It shows him who he has been. And from there, he can decide who he wants to become. The use of writing as a tool is a real technique in psychotherapy. By writing to his inner child, Damien activates the connection with the most vulnerable and authentic part of himself, the part that was forgotten, ignored, and that now finally has a voice. When he says, "I won't leave you alone anymore," we witness a moment of reparenting, of becoming the adult he once needed. And that act creates deep emotional repair. In the long run, these kinds of practices reduce anxiety and enhance self-compassion. The silences that once felt like punishment now become a refuge, because his relationship with himself has changed. He no longer fears solitude. He embraces it because he's no longer alone within himself. Now, he listens to himself, validates himself, stands by himself. The moment of saying no more is not an act of rage. It's an act of clarity. Jung said that awareness hurts at first, but later it frees you. And that's exactly what we see in Damien, a serenity born from having seen everything and having accepted it. His encounter with his ex isn't an emotional climax. It's a validation of his transformation. She hasn't changed. He has. And that contrast allows him to see, with emotional distance, what he couldn't see before, that he no longer needs more evidence because the truth is already within him. Blocking her isn't revenge. It's a boundary. It's self-care. And when it comes from a calm place, it's one of the highest forms of self-love, because it's not done to hurt, but to protect the sacred process of healing. The new relationships that come into his life aren't magical. They're aligned with his new inner frequency. As Jung taught, when you transform internally, your outer world begins to reconfigure. You don't attract what you want. You attract what you are. The deepest part of Damien's story isn't his escape from a toxic relationship. It's his return to himself. As Viktor Frankl said, meaning is what allows us to endure any pain. And Damien found that meaning in his inner reconnection. Sharing his story with others is part of his final integration. Pain that is transformed into a lesson stops being trauma and becomes wisdom. In Jungian terms, this is the archetype of the wounded healer. One who heals helps others heal. Damien was never the same again, because once you truly choose yourself, you cannot betray yourself without feeling an unbearable emptiness. That emptiness is the soul reminding you. You've awakened, and you can no longer fall asleep in the face of mistreatment. This kind of transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's progressive, but irreversible, because consciousness, once activated, doesn't disappear. It might fall dormant, but it doesn't fade. This story also reminds us that sometimes we have to hit rock bottom before we can rise. But rock bottom is not a punishment. It's a doorway, a threshold. It's the place where you leave behind what you're not and reclaim what you had forgotten. Damien represents all those who ever lost themselves loving someone else. All those who once believed they deserved less. All those who confused intensity with love, silence with peace, pain with connection. This story shows that healing is not a destination, it's a path. And on that path, there will be doubts, tears, setbacks, but there will also be light, strength, and freedom. And once you've walked it, nothing is ever the same. Jung spoke of becoming who you truly are as the soul's greatest purpose. And that purpose is not achieved by pleasing others, by enduring, or by disappearing. It's achieved by choosing yourself, by making your truth your flag. The key was never in leaving the relationship. The key was in facing himself. And that gaze, that radical honesty with oneself, is what gives birth to a new life. So if the bravest thing you could do today isn't to keep fighting for someone's approval, but to stop tolerating what's breaking you, ask yourself, how many times have you called love what was really fear of being alone? How many times have you stayed in a relationship out of habit guilt, or the absurd idea that better the devil you know? How long will you keep justifying mistreatment as bad moments? How long will you keep believing that setting boundaries makes you selfish, when in truth, it brings you closer to your essence? Can you remember the last time you kept quiet just to avoid losing someone? What part of yourself did you lose in that silence? And what would happen if today you chose to speak, not to hurt, but to honor your truth? Have you considered that every time you tolerate the intolerable, you're giving the other person permission to continue? That your silence is being read as acceptance, and your soul is registering it as abandonment? What does it say about you that you keep seeking love from those who don't know how to care? What old story are you replaying? Is your partner the source of your pain, or just a reflection of a wound that was already there? Where is your voice in this story? Where is your number more? How much longer will you wait for the other person to change, while you fade away? Carl Jung said that the healthy person does not adapt to a sick society. So if, in order to keep a relationship, you've been adapting to something emotionally unhealthy, maybe it's time to heal the very idea you have of love. And if the truest act of love is not insisting, but letting go, isn't it more powerful to choose yourself, even if that means losing someone? Isn't it more dignified to respect yourself, even if that means being alone for a while? Now I want you to ask yourself one more thing. If today you were your own best friend, would you advise yourself to keep tolerating this? Or would you firmly say, "You don't deserve this. That's enough"? And if you would say it to someone you love, why not say it to yourself? Today you've walked a deep journey. You've listened to teachings from Jung. You've understood that some behaviors should never be justified. That misunderstood empathy is a trap. That your soul needs a home, not a battlefield. So tell me, are you going to return to that place where your peace turns into silence? Or will you turn your pain into awakening, your wound into a teacher, your story into a victory? This is not just the end of a video. It is the beginning of a new pact with yourself. A pact that says, I will no longer abandon myself for anyone. So if this content touched your soul, I invite you to leave a mark, a sign, a public commitment to yourself. Go to the comments and write this phrase. My story begins the moment I choose not to tolerate what dims my light. Write it as a promise, as a testimony, as a declaration. Because sometimes all it takes is one sentence, one enough, one I choose me, for the entire universe to begin turning in your favor. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having the courage to look inward. This is Psychologically Reflective. See you in the next soul journey. And remember, it's not about being loved without conditions. It's about deciding never again to abandon yourself for anyone.